Good morning, Abundant Life Church. This is Pastor Chris. Today we're going to be in Romans chapter 8, verses 12 down through 17. Years ago, my mom and dad took our entire family, both my sisters, their families, all the grandkids, everybody. I think there were like 19 people total. They took us all on a cruise. It was a wonderful time. We never been on anything like that. Our boys just had the best time in their lives. And everything was great because you didn't have to pay for anything. You just ordered whatever you wanted for dinner. If you wanted two entrees, you ordered two entrees. What we didn't know, what nobody had told us because we'd never been on a cruise before, is that at the end of it, you were supposed to tip your waiter. And that meant, a lot of money because think how many meals you ate there. We didn't know this. We didn't bring enough cash with us. I think we only had enough to leave like a 4% tip or something like that. On the last morning, that breakfast, let's just say the waiters were not happy with us. We thought it was free. It wasn't. Now, grace is free, right? When we come to God, we can just get to grace. We don't have to pay anything. Well, I thought it was until this passage here. In today's passage, Paul tells us that we have an obligation to God. We owe God something. That seems pretty obvious. But haven't we also heard that grace is a free gift that we cannot possibly repay? If God gave us his son, how do we repay that? How do we square accounts with God? So what was Paul talking about here when he said we have an obligation? What is it that we owe God, and how are we supposed to go about repaying it? This is what we'll look at today. So let's start here with verse 12. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it is not to flesh to live according to it. Paul was writing about the idea that in Jesus we are set free from the old system of the law. We could never live up to that perfection that the law demanded. So we could never get to God, but God gave us Jesus so we could get to him. That's a gift we can never possibly repay. And that's the whole idea of grace. All right? And now Paul brings up that word, obligation. There's this obligation we supposedly have, and an obligation carries with it the sense that we are in debt to somebody and that we have the burden of paying back this obligation. But doesn't that go against the whole idea of grace, which is based on the fact that we can't square up accounts with God? So what does Paul think that we owe God? And how exactly are we supposed to go about repaying him? Excuse me. Look now at verse 13, because Paul is going to describe this obligation even further. He says that it involves good behavior on our parts. Verse 13, for if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of this body, you will live. Okay, but again, wasn't grace taking away the whole idea of behave yourself and then God will love you? It looks like here, according to this verse, we do have to behave ourselves in order to get God to love us. We're right back to a works righteousness system. We're right back to having to hopefully someday say, hey, God, I've done so many good things for you that now we're even. A friend of mine was in ministry. Or let me rephrase that. I have a friend, he's still in ministry to this day, and he was telling me once that he was going through a rough patch, and he was very frustrated. And in his prayer once, he just went, God, how can you do this to me after everything I've done for you? I don't know if that's the attitude we want to take with God. He quickly realized that that's not something you say to God. There's a fine line we have to walk. We know that we're saved by what Jesus did for us, not by what we've done for him. But on the other hand, we know that God forgiving all our sins doesn't mean that we're free now to just sin with impunity. So apparently our behavior does matter, but how does it? And in the middle of this whole discussion on grace versus good works versus how do you live now that you're a Christian, Paul comes along and says we have an obligation to God that involves our being good. Does this mean that God is going to revoke our salvation if we're not good enough? Well, the answer to this is going to be discussed next time. Till then, have a great day.